Hello, welcome to This is England Short Film Festival. This is England Short Film Festival has always been English. It now has been British and Irish for about 8 years now. And this year we've got a new flavor to it. It's Iranian flavor. Thanks to Tara. Tara is here to represent the film Empty Your Pockets. And we'll get back to it very quickly, but it's about a situation which is very particular and it's quite common to other films, but we'll go back to discussing individual films later, because now I would like to introduce to the second team here we have for Houston's Whitebeam, a documentary film made by Jake and Alex, all right? And we could watch it yesterday in the big screen of room number 1 on Omnia Republic Theatre here in Rouen, and it was very impressive on that big screen to see the shots you had on this gorge in Bristol and this woman, which is a very interesting subject, I think, and we get back to it too, of course, and eventually Luke, who's, some kind of a, well, you've been there 3 times, maybe?
Yes, this is England fan.
Okay, so that's it, and we can say that. And representing the film Till Death Do Us Part, a very dark comedy, with, for your 3 films, something that we might, that might bring them together to start a discussion. It's the fact that they are all picturing or focusing on a certain kind of madness in our society or in people in general, just maybe to escape from society. But the fact is, there is this connection between your 3 films. So either in a very serious way with a society which is pressuring people to do crazy things, or society maybe pushing people to do crazy things just to escape from the usual life, and a kind of observation of a relationship between people in a community and pushing it so far that it becomes crazy, and you can see that it's some kind of caricature of human behavior. So my first question to start with, and Tara, if you don't mind, I'd like you to start with that. It's how madness can inspire filmmakers to start a project.
Sure. Have to say also, this is my 2nd film at the festival and first time that I'm here, so really happy to be here with everyone. Madness. Generally speaking, I feel that our, how we define normal isn't necessarily reflective of reality. I do feel like we all have madness in us or madness around us that we're trying to navigate whilst pretending to be, normal and rational individuals. And that can kind of scale out to countries as well. And I think what this film captures, it's how a system or a governance or a regime can be completely disconnected from the temperaments, the desires, and the needs of its society. And I think that's a historical thing, and it's a universal thing. It happens in the West, in the UK, in America. It can happen anywhere, but it is a source of tension and drama that I thought would be very interesting to capture in the airport setting, because first of all, it's a language that we're all familiar with. We've all been through an airport. We know the rules, and to put a pause there, if you told someone 20 years ago at some point in airports you have to take your shoes off and get rid of bottles that are 100 ml, they'd be like, that's mad. So it's sort of relative, this idea of what is normal and what's mad. And I think in this story, it's maybe a little bit accentuated, this idea that laws or rules such as from the bottle to things like how you dress as a woman, all of these things become sort of in focus. And it's a society that I grew up in and I know, which is very pluralistic, and there is a huge part of the population that want complete autonomy over how they dress, what they wear, very basic stuff and non-basic stuff. And of course you have people who are religious, and you have, like anywhere in the world. And the idea is that trying to homogenize a society often fails, as it also does in this story and in the airport in its own way.
Yeah. And the fact is, I mean, airport is the place where you go through to leave the place, okay?
Yeah.
And well, and that's what I said before about your film too, that women seems to be leaving, you know, the real world, to be living a life of their own in nature. So is it about escaping from the reality, what she does, or what do you think about your, you know her very well now, I guess. So what can you tell us about the kind of madness? And do you think it's a madness, or do you think it's just being very intelligent and rational? And
do you want to go, shall I?
Well, I think that, I mean, we wanted to really capture this kind of encounter with Libby, and it definitely starts from a point that we came from, that was, what is this crazy woman doing on the side of the cliff? And we begin the film with that. But I think as we met her and got to know her, and as the film progresses, which we wanted to kind of replicate that experience, you kind of look under the kind of superficial image of a very old lady doing something that, you know, standardly she wouldn't be. And I think that her experience in the local area, you know, this incredibly rare or unique microclimate that is pretty much part of Bristol City, it seems more, she's more attuned to what is actually going on in the area. You know, there's a huge road going through it, but there's also rare trees and rare species there, and there's certain, maybe it's mad to notice that, but it's also, she's noticing the things that are really there in front of her, and she's doing it, you know, counting every single one. So there's an element to maybe madness about her method of doing that, but it seems like it's actually more attuned with maybe more primal considerations as to kind of connections to the
yeah,
world.
so watching her is, you know, realizing how mad our society is, more than the other way around. That's what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, true.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's kind of what you said as well around like, yeah, madness being like a differentiation from the norm, but maybe the norm is actually the one that's more out of tune. She's actually incredibly rational and incredibly interested in truth. She's kind of obsessed with truth, both in poetry and in botany, and she talks about that in the film, how they're different but the same. They're about coming to an understanding of the world around you. And I think that that's the note that we end it on as well. We sort of leave it quite unexplained, but she says that she wants to continue her work, count all of these trees. She says she doesn't know if she's going to make it, but she thinks it's important. And I think that that idea of what we value and what is important is really is kind of at the heart of it. And I think that her idea of what's important might be quite different from the norm in many ways, but I think it's actually one that is, as you say, like more attuned with what we should value.
Yeah. So, well, your film is documentary film, so it's pretty different from fiction films because you don't start with a set idea. I think when you write fictions, we might discuss that later, but you start with the idea in your mind. Here, you started because you thought that woman was special, and then shooting, meeting her for several months, you got to discover aspects of her that you had not imagined. So I guess the project you had in mind first changed dramatically with time. Yeah. So that's quite interesting too, because an artistic project, I mean, you've got the idea in mind, and in the end you've got something different, but you don't remember what you had in mind first sometimes. No, but the things evolve like that. So Luke, what about you? Because your community portrait there is so crazy that
this is kind of, it is a little bit of hot fuzz world. I suppose, intriguingly, I suppose the question you have about is there madness in filmmaking, that there's always got to be conflict, otherwise we don't have a film. And because we're really focusing in on particular characters, you're going to notice more about the individuals than we do about the people we walk past every day. Intriguingly, our story is based on a story that's 4,000 years old. So that in itself says something about the fact that I mean, we've adapted it and it's extrapolated and put in a different country in a different place, but there's a madness to humanity, if you like, that is part of our makeup. There's about the way we relate to people and the foolish things we do to try and make up for others' failings, or to amend for others' mistakes, or the mistakes we make ourselves and the other things we overlook. So I think there's something about the way filmmakers look at the world is to hold a mirror to it. And of course we have that argument all the time. Are we holding the mirror, or do we generate what people do? And we know that people copycat what they see in film as much as we try to play back to them what they're doing in society. So it's an interesting conversation about where does the madness truly lie.
True. But the thing is, do you feel that you're responsible for some, reactions to your film, or do you feel that when you let the viewer do his work as a viewer, and not try to direct him or her towards some kind of thinking, maybe?
That was interesting, because you were saying you left it open, right? So sorry, I haven't seen your documentary. Apologies for that. But you're leaving it open for the viewer to consider what they should conclude from it.
Yeah, I think that sense of what is important, she never really explains it, but at the same time the film kind of does sort of explain it as well, that I think through the film itself you can see that she's gained a lot of like solace and sense of who she is and where sort of she begins and the world ends, and vice versa, through her work, through her grief, through her loss of her husband, how at that time she then kind of becomes entangled in the environment. And I think that kind of like emotional connection to landscape is sort of what she's saying is important, and how that shapes who we are. So in a way it is left open what's important about her particular work, but at the same time I do kind of think that the film sort of hopefully shows that the importance in a broad sense is around feeling grounded and connected to particular local natural spaces in a concrete way. Concrete's a bad term for trees, but
and I think short films are particularly suited for open endings, because you tend to leave a lot of things unsaid, or you leave because it's short. So you focus on a real, very important passage, turning point maybe in the life of a character, but then you leave details before, just people to picture, have in mind what kind of person, character and people are interacting there. And in the end the same. You don't want to conclude, because maybe you feel, okay, material is just in the middle, and so let's people do their work and imagine. And that's why I think short films, maybe, I don't know if you are involved in longer films, feature films, or in series or stuff like that, where you have got the time to develop really things. But in short film, I think that's what makes it very tense.
It does. With Empty Your Pockets, there is a few layers, and it has quite a few characters, these vignettes of people who are basically leaving for various reasons. And throughout the process, I got a lot of notes about, Tara, can we get rid of some of these characters? It's just a short, this is a little bit too complicated. It also has this kind of surreal, sort of the ant analogy that kind of runs through it. I know you haven't seen it yet, but you'll see what I mean when I say the ant soon enough. But for me, I wanted to capture all of these moments, and I didn't want to give it actually any more time than they had in this 19-20 minute space, because of kind of this idea of it just provoking and evoking certain ideas and thoughts, and not necessarily answering those questions or giving you too much. But I think with short film you are sort of pushed into simplicity, which sometimes even feels more difficult, because you might have a lot to say. And I don't know if I've gotten the balance right yet,
I think so.
But it's certainly a thing that I'm very conscious of. I'm working on a feature film now, and it's really not in a world of any of my shorts. But I think once you have more time to just simply spend more time with a protagonist, then you can be a lot more abstract in other ways, and you can take risks in other ways, because you don't have, every frame doesn't have to establish so much immediately. So I'm very curious about having that kind of time to. And I also came across this quote. I think it's Susan Sontag, but correct me if anyone knows, that says, interpretation is the intellectual's revenge on the artist. And I love it, because I do think also with this short, I often have so many different reactions to it, because I think it's kind of packed with a lot of things, and again, it might not be so advised for a short film, but I love that quality in it, and I like watching films that do that too. So,
I mean, the short form should intrigue. If we're making something, we need to be in as late as possible and out as soon as possible, is the old adage. But I remember reading Dubliners at school. We had to study it by James Joyce, and being quite shocked by these stories that didn't seem to have a beginning and an end. It was kind of, breaks the rules, no. But then you're left. I'm still left. I'm sat here years later, too many years later. But I can see some of those characters in Dubliners before my eyes, because I'm taken to a place where somehow I'm hooked in. So I'm looking forward to seeing your film. I think also filmmakers think deeply about every film. I often say this to people who don't understand the process. We think about every line that we're writing. We write it, then we shoot it, then we edit it, then we're grading and colouring and sound design on the end of that. There isn't a frame we haven't looked at. And when somebody else spots a mistake and goes, you left a coffee cup, you're going, oh, really, please? And because of that, we have layered it, and we're expecting the audience will see different things. And I love that. I love that. People, it's like taking a diamond and putting it through light. And some people see yellow, some see blue, some see red. And I think that's what you're getting with a short film in particular. And also, look, how can you have three films that could be in the same screening and all totally different? Will take us to different places, and we will find connections as well, because that's how humans have learnt. They've learnt by telling stories, and they've learnt by comparing stories and seeing commonality.
I usually make the comparison of shorts are poetry, and then features are more novels or novellas. And
nice.
And I, growing up in Iran, I grew up with a very. I always joke that every other person in Iran is either a filmmaker or a director, so a poet or a director. So you do grow up with like poetry so enshrined in the culture, and I think poetry is that very subconscious expression of an idea. And I used to be in documentaries before, and I think one of the things that really attracted me to have a go at fiction was this idea of being able to kind of be a bit more abstract with it, or take some risks that maybe they're a little bit more difficult to take with documentary, because you're at the behest of your subject, and you also have the responsibility to kind of capture them as they are and not intervene too much, whereas as a fiction filmmaker it's all intervention. But I was wondering if I may ask a question.
Of course, yeah.
Because you said you did fiction before doing this documentary together. How was that transition for you? What was it like?
Well, it was great to be able to actually respond to a real person, I think, and actually taking a lot of your cues from what's in front of you, what looks nice, but also what can you capture that kind of totally encapsulates the essence of this person. I mean, talking about like truth and the short form, I think that our short kind of started singing when we actually realized we weren't ever going to be able to tell the story of this whole person or this whole life, or this whole kind of arc of a person. It's actually when we started stripping things away and looking at things that she said that was more abstract, more philosophical.
Transcendent.
Totally. It allowed, I think, an audience to come in and kind of encounter her as they would, rather than through our eyes particularly. And also left a lot of things open about, we weren't answering questions about her legacy, or how she feels about getting older, or how she feels about having species named after her. I mean, also that was her. She didn't really have decisive stuff about how she should be remembered or how she wanted her life to be told. She was more specific about the stuff that she discovered, about the area that she knew so well. She was really quite self-deprecating, really, and that was really kind of enjoyable to watch, that this person who's basically an expert on her craft and has been for years is still very adamant that it's not about her.
Did you worry how she might be on camera, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in this in saying that, you know, that documentaries, you do feel an obligation to do justice to what people are saying, but I actually think that it works better when you treat it like fiction, because you're aware of how constructed it is, because they are so constructed. And I think the more that we thought in that sense of like having deep conversations with her, getting to know what she's about, and then creating something that is in many ways, it's a work of fiction. It's never, you know, the minute you point a camera, the minute you make a cut, like it's constructed, and I think that works really well. And I think that, like, kind of, coming back to what you're saying around like short form being kind of like poetry, and obviously like how she, you know, has her poetry in there as well. But I think you can, even though you feel like kind of an obligation to be true to your understanding of her, it is still just a fragment. Like, this is her whole life that we're kind of telling, and it's just a small moment. And in all of those choices do kind of create that imaginative space and leaving things open, like you said. It's like there's the Canadian poet Anne Carson writes a lot about fragments and like Sappho's fragments, and there's one that says, as a sweet apple reddens on a high branch, high on the highest branch, and the apple pickers forgot, no, not forgot, were unable to reach. And she says it's like a perfect photograph of desire, where you kind of have a subject and an object in this space in between, but it's that like space in between, the abstraction, where all of, I think, the desire to know and desire itself kind of like come in. And I think short form is a really exciting space to kind of create that like charged space in between for interpretation.
It's interesting. It's interesting the relationship you were saying there between intervention and fiction, because ours is an adaptation, and we get lots of feedback on how is that an adaptation? Is that's not the story? How have you adapted that? And your story, I feel you have some truth that you're exploring in your fiction, right?
Absolutely.
And you have some real character that you're exploring in a fictional context.
Yes, and we kind of made it slightly more absurd, and the story gets increasingly more absurd.
But to extract the truth that you're looking for.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Which is exactly the same thing. And sometimes I think for people who may not understand the art of the storytelling, that seems... fiction can be, or you're telling stories, fibs, lies. It's a little tweak of English that moves you on. You're not really presenting the truth, but it is telling the truth. It's seeking a way in which we cut out other colours from the palette, if go back to the diamond, and we just want to look at one colour. And all we're doing is we're saying, right, we're going to look at one colour for this lady, or we're going to look at this situation. I wish I had seen your film now.
We'll talk again after.
We'll talk again afterwards. But something in there, and we're looking at relationships, really, because that's the thing we're adapting, is this ancient story of a weird love triangle. Well, not quite love, really. Anyway, it's a bit weird. But anyway, it's an adaptation of that story. And I think that when we do that, when we focus in on one thing, we allow people to suddenly explore it. And you could retell your story, you could remake your documentary, we could readapt our story 20 different ways, 100 different ways.
Yeah, and I think it's such an opportunity each time. Like, you know, you're challenging yourself with an adaptation and finding meaning again in it again. You're putting yourself in the life of a woman that, you know, is like completely from a different generation, from a different life. And Empty Your Pockets for me was very interesting because the protagonist is a man in a uniform in Iran, you know, and I'm part of the, you know, dissident movement where we're trying to gain rights back for women. But it was a very interesting point of view for me to explore, because things everywhere have become so, you know, binary in terms of the bad and the good. And I was so interested to kind of explore this sort of nuanced narrative where there is a young man who happens to be born in this part of the world, And, you know, he's not a believer, he's not one of the enforcers, and he's not necessarily one of the oppositions on the street. But Iran is a country of 90 million people. There is a lot of grayscale in between, and a lot of people are just surviving. They're not ideologues, as is in the UK or in America, everywhere where we see these super polarized sentiments. So I was really interested to kind of put myself in his perspective and in his shoes and explore this world. And it felt a bit tricky in the moment because of obvious reasons, but it ended up creating a lot of conversation, and I like that, and I think that's one of the things that I took from my previous life as a journalist, is this sense of investigation into the characters, where you don't walk into it with a bias and a judgment. You're like, I want to understand and I want to know, and I may at the end of the day or at the end of the film make a judgment about it. But and I think, I mean, I haven't seen your film, but I think your film has that sense as well, that you don't feel like the character is being judged. You really feel like she's just you're just sharing her world with us without us, making any type of weird assumptions.
It's interesting too, because if you put someone in a uniform, and I'm watching the film, the moment I see the uniform, I have all these preconceptions as the audience.
Yeah.
So you're taking us on the journey of discovery, which is essentially what you're trying to do with the documentary, with the subject as well. So there's a really interesting journey for us to unpack for the viewer. But we come at it with all sorts of levels of knowledge, and we won't always get that nuance quite right. But really fascinating to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who you would not necessarily relate to or feel yourself akin to.
Yeah.
Did you know somebody who'd worn uniform back in Iran?
No, I've only known them when they're the opposite of me. When they're arresting me. No, but like I said, I went to school in Iran. I grew up in, you go to school with teachers who, some of them are more strict, some of them, technically speaking, they're working within the system, but a lot of them are just teachers. They're doing their thing. What I learned growing up in Iran is not just how diverse and, like I said, pluralistic that society is, but also how terribly misinformed the rest of the world is, and how it's always looked at as this monolithic lump of, well, this is Iranians, To this day, I have really good friends of mine who, when I might send them a video of a rave or a concert in Tehran, they're like, oh, we didn't know that you can do that. And I was like, well, of course you can. But of course you also don't necessarily see it because the regime doesn't want you to see it. So it's not that people are inherently ignorant, it's that they don't have access. And I think one of the things I liked to do in this very short span of time was to put in characters that also don't agree with each other, or even the uniform wearers. There is such a diversity between the boss, the guy, this guy's boss, him, in terms of commitment to the system, but also how corrupt they might be or how innocent they might be. I think there is a lot of variety in there that's it's always hard to explain, and maybe medium of film is also difficult to want to approach in a very nuanced way, because you have your protagonist and your antagonist, and we have anti-heroes, but it is it's a challenge, but I like that challenge. I think if I can do one thing that I would like to keep doing is bring characters that you might have presumptions about and kind of subvert those tropes, essentially.
Is that what came first? Did the character come first, or was it kind of the situation? Because we're kind of lucky in doc that we're confronted with something.
With the character.
Let's capture.
Yeah, good question. I think this specific script, which is the first one that has anything to do with Iran and very personal in that sense, it came through, my partner travels a lot, and he travels to Iran still. I can't go, unfortunately, but I used to go back very frequently. And every time either him or any of my family would leave, they'd be like, oh, Tara, like this time this thing happened. And so all of these anecdotes had kind of coalesced in the back of my mind, including my own interactions with various customs officers in Iran. But I think the story that really opened it up for me was that my partner was bringing a sculpture for me that a friend of mine had made, who's an artist in Iran. And they had this really absurd interaction with the TSA officer who was like, well, what is this? And he's like, well, it's contemporary art. And he's like, well, I don't know if... And so they had this whole interaction. And when he told me this story, I was like, okay, that's it. And then I just started writing. A lot of the interactions in the film have actually happened one way or another. So yeah, it was the situation first and then the character. Because in the early drafts, like, you didn't really relate to the officer. He was kind of like the butt of the joke a little bit. But then I was like, and I actually resisted liking him. But then after a bit, I was like, but who is he? And why is he here? And can I find a way to him? And that sort of then unlocked this specific character, yeah.
I have a question about the DOP. Is your DOP Iranian too?
Farhad, oh my God, he's a legend. He's half Iranian, half Mexican.
Yeah, because I mean, just the image. I mean, when you watch the film, after 5 seconds, you feel it's Iranian.
Oh,
you know?
nice.
And
I'll
there is
tell
something
him.
interesting about that, because I mean, filmmaking, cinema is international. But when you watch a Japanese film, even if you haven't got any Japanese people in
it's
it,
Japanese.
or Iranian film, British film, French film, right from the start, you get the impression that there we are. Okay, so
Yes.
how can you explain that? How can you do that when you're a DOP? You've worked with those people, so what makes it different? Do you know?
Maybe it's sort of the images that you grow up with. I mean, Farhad specifically actually has never been to Iran, and it was such an exploration for him to kind of get to his own roots as well. But like, my production designer was an Iranian. I was sharing 1 billion photos with her every day. But I don't know, I think maybe, I mean, you guys can speak on this, but for me, tonally, the film was really sort of a little bit of a Roy Andersson meets, you know, I didn't want to do the social realist Iranian signature, because not that it's bad, but it's like, as a country, I think, or as a culture, you do sometimes get stuck in a language because the world reacts to it. Every festival likes it, so you keep repeating it. And I think Canadians do that, British people do that. So personally for me, I was like, how can I do maybe something a little bit more, you know, moody and a little bit more restrained than the social realist that usually happens in Iran. But how did you guys, yeah.
Even your documentary, I mean, when you watch it after a few seconds, you're set in Britain, of course, I mean, the landscape, but the fact is, it's fascinating to see that there are elements, I think it's unconscious, but the fact is, it's, I mean, so visible when you're in the audience. Here in the Cinéma Omnia République, I mean, you can watch films from all around the world every week, and it's, I mean, it's traveling. No, for a very cheap fare, you sit in the cinema, and you're, as I said, in any country, Finland or wherever, and there is a light, okay, a quality of light. It's especially the quality of light in the image, I think. And
it's probably also the impact of social. There'll be something about the films we've watched as we've grown up, that we've lived with, and we're now into what, film's 140 years old? So the first 2 generations of who made film are all dead. I mean, so we're well into our filmmaking history, and we have much more history to it than maybe when I was younger, you were younger maybe. But it feels like an older medium now that has grown up and has grown its own voice. We can always tell a French film.
Yeah, true,
for
true,
sure,
true,
a long
true.
way off.
Yeah.
And you know, oh yeah, I know exactly where I am. We don't need to see the Eiffel Tower or croissant. That's what the Americans think. The Americans would think in short filmmaking, they would think you have to see something iconic that tells you which country you're in. We would have to have a post box and a double-decker bus, and you would probably have to have someone in hijab or someone being arrested, or it's those cliches that we're not telling. I think that we're just naturally being in our own scope, in our own storytelling style.
Yeah. So
It's
anyway,
the vernacular, really.
if you want to watch because I mean Quentin is in charge here, you know, he's the boss. And
He is the
when
boss.
you say stop, I must stop.
It's a short film.
Just make
after
sure
all.
that come to Kinepolis this evening, and we'll have plenty of emotion watching films from Britain, British film too.
British film too, yeah, exactly.
And that's what's exciting. It's and we've got a few films focusing on immigration in Britain. Okay, and so this is slightly different. I mean, that's what I like in it, because I thought, well, what is British in there? But it is British too, and that's very important to
Yes.
make the point clear for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we can keep talking after.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ball and chain. Running is the choice.